Welcome to Conspiracist.
Glad to be here.
Today we're undertaking a deep dive into a really compelling question. Have governments intentionally concealed evidence related to, let's say, hidden truths of ancient civilizations?
It's a fascinating topic, definitely. It really touches on how we understand our own history, the nature of knowledge itself.
Absolutely. We've got a range of sources in front of us, archaeological findings, discussions on ancient tech, alternative history theories.
Quite a mix. So the goal is objectivity here. Evaluating the actual evidence, the reasoning presented in these sources for this alleged concealment.
Precise. We need to approach this professionally, weigh the arguments carefully.
It requires a very careful consideration of the claims versus the supporting evidence, or sometimes the lack of evidence.
Right. And it seems there's this deep, persistent human fascination with ancient mysteries driving all this.
There is that fundamental curiosity about where we come from, about the unknown.
Yeah, Professor Andrea M. Berlin touches on this, that allure of what we can't see, what came before us. It's almost primal, isn't it?
It certainly is. That inherent curiosity is a powerful driver for exploration, but also, for speculation.
Exactly. So you can see how the gaps in our knowledge, these unanswered questions, could easily lead people to wonder if something's being hidden.
Understandably so. Let's maybe look at some specific examples where people claim evidence was concealed. Guanabara Bay in Brazil comes to mind.
Ah, yes, Robert Marx and the Roman amphoras. That was back in, 1982?
That's the one. He claimed he found these jars, amphoras, covered in barnacles and insisted they were Roman.
Which would mean Romans in Brazil way, way before the Portuguese, over 1,000 years earlier, potentially.
A huge claim. But his work didn't continue, did it?
No, the Brazilian government stepped in. They banned further exploration, accused him of looting, essentially shut down the underwater investigation right there.
And Marx had his own version of events.
He did. He accused the Brazilian Navy, claimed they deliberately dumped sediment, right onto the site where he found the amphoras.
Why would he claim they did that?
His argument was they wanted to stop history from being rewritten to, preserve the established narrative. A pretty dramatic accusation.
Very dramatic, suggesting an active cover-up to suppress evidence that could change everything we thought we knew about transatlantic contact.
So where does that leave us now with Guanabara Bay? Is there any consensus?
Well, the sources we have indicate that despite Marx's claims and all the controversy, the idea of Romans on the coast of Brazil, it's still unproven.
No conclusive archaeological evidence has really emerged that backs up his interpretation, not widely accepted anyway.
Not in the mainstream academic community, no. And this raises a crucial point for listeners to consider. Just because something isn't definitively proven doesn't automatically mean there's been a cover-up.
That's a really important distinction to make. Absence of proof isn't proof of conspiracy.
Exactly. Now, another interesting site mentioned in our materials is the Yonaguni Monument, that underwater structure off Japan.
Right, the one that looks strikingly like a man-made step pyramid submerged underwater.
It is visually impressive, and the debate there is really fundamental. Is it natural or artificial?
So one camp says ruins of an ancient civilization. Sunken city vibes.
Precisely that. Some researchers point to the sharp angles, the terraces, the seemingly geometric shapes, and argue it must be man-made, evidence of a lost, maybe pre-glacial culture.
But there's a strong counter-argument, isn't there?
Oh, very strong. Many geologists argue it's entirely natural.
How so?
They attribute the appearance to the local geology, the type of rock, sandstone, and mudstone, combined with natural processes, tectonic activity causing fractures, and then powerful ocean currents eroding the rock along those fracture lines over millennia.
So nature mimicking architecture.
That's the idea. A striking example of geofacts, natural formations that look artificial. So the concealment idea here is less clear-cut. Is someone suppressing the natural explanation or the artificial one? The scientific debate is ongoing.
These cases really highlight the difficulty, don't they? Interpreting ambiguous evidence from the distant past. Is it logical to jump straight to cover-up when definitive proof is missing?
It's a tempting leap, perhaps, but in serious inquiry, whether historical or archaeological, skepticism and rigorous method are key. There are many reasons for a lack of proof.
Like it.
Well, the simple passage of time destroys evidence. Sites erode, materials decay. Our methods might not be advanced enough yet to detect certain things, or maybe, just maybe, the evidence people are hoping for simply doesn't exist.
So accusing intentional suppression, that needs its own strong evidence, right? not just the absence of other evidence.
Absolutely. The burden of proof for a cover-up claim is significant.
Okay, let's shift gears slightly. Our sources also talk about supposed suppressed knowledge in ancient texts. The whole Mayan calendar 2012 thing is a big example.
2012. That generated a huge amount of discussion, didn't it? A lot of doomsday predictions floating around based on the Mayan calendar ending a cycle.
But actual archaeological finds paint a different picture.
They do provide crucial context. For instance, there's an inscription found at La Corona in Guatemala, hieroglyphic stairway 12. It dates back to the 7th century AD.
And what does it say?
It talks about historical events, a royal court being established, and it does reference the Mayan long count calendar, including the end of the 13th Batten cycle. That's roughly a 400-year period.
Okay, so it mentions the end date, but does it predict anything catastrophic? Apocalypse, end of the world?
That's the key point. No. There's nothing in that inscription, or others like it really, about a world-ending event tied to December 21st, 2012. It directly contradicts those popular doomsday theories.
So the Mayans themselves, or at least the ones who carved this, didn't seem to be forecasting doom.
It strongly suggests they weren't. The focus seems to be more on the cyclical nature of time, endings leading to beginnings.
Like the Mayan fire ceremony that actually took place in Tikal on that date.
Exactly. That was framed largely as a celebration, marking the end of one cycle and the dawn of a new era. That aligns much better with scholarly understanding of the Mayan calendar system.
So the suppressed knowledge here might actually be the original Mayan understanding getting buried under layers of, well, New Age interpretation and media hype.
That's a very plausible way to look at it. The primary texts just don't support the apocalyptic readings that became so widespread.
Okay, let's move on to another major theme. Claims of surprisingly advanced ancient technology. Our sources list quite a few intriguing examples.
Yes, this is a rich area for speculation. You have things that seem, on the surface at least, quite sophisticated for their time.
Like Greek fire.
Greek fire, exactly. Yeah. That legendary inextinguishable flame the Byzantines used. We still don't know the exact formula. Or Damascus steel.
The swords, right?
Yeah.
Incredibly sharp, flexible.
Famed for it. And modern science suggests features like carbon nanotubes might be involved, though the precise production method was lost. Then there's Roman concrete.
Still standing, some of it, even underwater. Incredibly durable stuff.
Its longevity is remarkable, and the list goes on.
The Antikythera mechanism.
Often called the first analog computer, found in a shipwreck, incredibly complex gearing for astronomical calculations.
The Baghdad batteries. Could they have generated electricity?
That's the theory some propose. Simple clay pots with copper and iron rods. Whether they were truly batteries is debated, but they're suggestive.
And Zhang Heng's seismoscope in China detecting earthquakes from afar.
An amazing piece of early engineering. And then you get into even more enigmatic things, like those pipes near Mount Beigong in China.
Those are really strange, aren't they? The dating, the material.
Potentially 150,000 years old, made of unidentified material, some radioactivity reported. Even the state media investigators called them a mystery. Very unusual.
We also have things like the Ulfbert Viking swords, with metallurgy seemingly ahead of its time.
Showing a purity of steel difficult to achieve then.
And the London hammer, found inside rock that's supposed to be incredibly old.
Encased in a concretion, yes. Though the dating of both the hammer and the rock is complex and debated.
What all these examples do, though, is fuel that idea of lost knowledge, maybe suppressed technology.
They certainly raise questions. They suggest that maybe our picture of ancient technological capabilities isn't quite complete. It forces us to reconsider the ingenuity of past peoples.
And some people take that further, looking at massive structures like the Great Pyramid of Giza.
Right. The argument often made is that the scale, the precision, it's just too advanced for the tools and methods we typically attribute to the ancient Egyptians.
Implying they must have had something else. Lost tech, outside help.
That's the line of reasoning. That conventional explanations involving copper tools, ramps, and immense manpower are insufficient.
But what does mainstream archaeology say about building the pyramids?
Well, the established view, based on decades of research, points to sophisticated project management, deep understanding of geometry and engineering, and yes, tools like copper chisels, dolerite pounders, wooden sledges, and likely intricate systems of ramps.
Is there physical evidence for these methods?
Oh yes, there's evidence from quarries showing tool marks consistent with those tools. We found examples of the tools themselves. There are remains of worker settlements, logistical records on papyri. While we don't know every single detail, the archaeological consensus is that the ancient Egyptians did possess the necessary skills and resources.
So no need to invoke lost super technology or aliens.
From the perspective of mainstream archaeology, the evidence points towards incredible human ingenuity and organization within the known technological context of the time. It was an immense feat, no doubt, but arguably achievable.
This naturally leads us into the area of what's often called pseudo-archaeology or alternative history. People like Graham Hancock come up often.
Yes, Hancock's work is very popular. He presents compelling narratives about potential lost civilizations, ancient cataclysms, often challenging mainstream archaeological interpretations and timelines.
How is his work generally received by archaeologists and historians?
It's viewed with significant skepticism within academia. Critics often point to methodological issues.
Like,
Things like selective use of evidence, highlighting data that fits the theory while ignoring data that contradicts it. Misinterpreting sources, sometimes drawing connections that aren't really supported by the data itself. A lack of rigorous peer review in the scientific sense.
so a different approach to evidence than standard academic practice.
Fundamentally different, yes. Anthropologist Jeb Card, for example, notes that some of these approaches seem to rely more on finding mysteries or invoking the paranormal, rather than building testable, evidence-based hypotheses, which is the core of the scientific method in archaeology.
It's about starting with a conclusion versus starting with evidence.
That's often the critique. Mainstream archaeology aims to build conclusions from the evidence, whereas pseudo-archaeology is sometimes seen as finding evidence for a predetermined conclusion.
We also see specific theories pop up, like the Tartarian Empire conspiracy. What's that about?
Tartaria. It's a theory proposing a huge, technologically advanced global empire called Tartaria existed, maybe in the relatively recent past, and its entire history has been deliberately erased or suppressed.
And the evidence cited is.
Often, proponents point to similarities in architecture across the world, grand, neoclassical buildings, or apparent inconsistencies in old maps and historical records. They interpret these as remnants or clues of this hidden empire.
But is there credible historical backing?
No, there's no credible historical or archaeological evidence supporting the existence of such an empire as described in the theory. It relies heavily on misinterpretations and taking things out of context.
And then there's pyramidology, focused specifically on pyramids.
Yes, pyramidology covers various pseudoscientific ideas that the pyramids, especially Giza's Great Pyramid, hold secret knowledge encoded in their dimensions, angles, or alignment.
Hidden maths, prophecies, spiritual secrets.
Things like that, often involving numerology or complex calculations that aren't supported by ancient Egyptian texts or standard Egyptological methods. It's imposing meaning onto the structures, rather than deriving meaning from historical context.
So bringing it back to the academic perspective, how do archaeologists and historians actually deal with genuine ancient mysteries or unexplained findings? Is there an automatic suppression?
Our sources suggest quite the opposite, actually. Academia, particularly in fields like history and archaeology, thrives on new discoveries. Getting a PhD usually requires original research.
Meaning a truly groundbreaking find would be huge for someone's career, not something to hide.
Exactly. A discovery that overturns established theories, if backed by solid evidence, would be a major contribution. The challenge isn't suppression, it's the rigorous process of verifying claims.
Distinguishing solid hypotheses from just speculation.
Precisely. Interpreting fragmentary evidence is inherently difficult. You need strong methodology, critical source analysis, looking at who wrote something, why comparing it with other sources.
And the field isn't totally closed off to new ideas, is it?
Not at all. Look at archaeoastronomy studying how ancient people understood the stars. That was once considered fringe by some, but with solid evidence, it's become a respected part of mainstream archaeology.
So openness is there, but it requires the evidence to back it up.
Correct. It's about the scientific method, verifiability. The idea of a hidden history, that the whole mainstream narrative is deliberately wrong, is central to many alternative theories. But concrete proof of a global conspiracy to hide major truths about antiquity, well, that proof just hasn't materialized.
And what about using ancient myths as literal history?
Myths are incredibly valuable. They tell us so much about a culture's beliefs, values, worldview. But treating them as direct, factual historical accounts without corroborating archaeological or textual evidence is problematic. They're primarily cultural narratives.
Okay, so after digging through all these different claims and perspectives, what's the bottom line on this idea of governments hiding ancient truths?
Well, what emerges clearly is that deep fascination with the ancient world, its mysteries, its impressive achievements. We see technologies that genuinely make us pause and think.
But does that point to a cover-up?
While some interpret the gaps, the anomalies, the unanswered questions as evidence of suppression, the dominant view within the academic world attributes these things differently.
To the inherent difficulties of the field.
Yes, to the challenges of interpreting sparse evidence, the natural decay of the past, and the normal ongoing process of scientific discovery, debate, and revision. The key takeaway, really, is the vital importance of separating speculation, however intriguing, from conclusions built on solid, verifiable evidence.
The burden of proof for a claim as huge as a global, centuries-long conspiracy by governments to hide ancient civilizations is extraordinarily high.
It is indeed. Rigorous source criticism, adherence to scientific method. These remain the best tools we have for trying to understand the past accurately. While the allure of hidden knowledge is strong and understandable, the sources we've looked at just don't provide compelling evidence for that kind of widespread, intentional concealment of ancient truths.
It seems the mysteries are often genuine, but the explanation might be more about the limits of our knowledge than about active suppression.
That sums up the prevailing academic perspective quite well. The search continues, but it has to be guided by evidence.
Thank you. This has been a really thorough deep dive into a complex subject.
It certainly covers a lot of ground. Always interesting to explore these ideas.
Thanks for listening to Conspiracist.